Hey guys, welcome to Haunted Tales. Tonight we're doing creepy, bizarre encounters, which is a collection of the best of so far that are creepy or weird encounters. I hope you guys like it. I'm trying a new setup. I hope this works. If you guys listened in last week, you would know that we had a lot of technical difficulties last week. So hopefully the way I'm doing it this time is going to be a little bit easier. So just bear with me and we'll get started pretty soon. Also, give a couple minutes for people to log on and see that we're live and join us if they're going to join us this evening. And make sure, you're checking out the Riff Radio Network. There is some new shows coming out that are pretty interesting. Also, that they're making a little bit of changes to some of the shows, adding on more hosts, getting more in depth into what they're doing on their podcast. So make sure that you go to the Riff Radio Network and check out all of them. They produce this show under Commons license, so I do appreciate that. And I think we're ready to get started, so just bear with me 1 second.
Would like to welcome you to tonight's special broadcast. This work is protected by Creative Commons license. And now, a word from our sponsors. The Skeleton Key. This mystical shop, found exclusively on Facebook, is stationed in Blossom, Texas. Purchase all of your very own unique religious, spiritual, and metaphysical items, to include the beginner altar kits. Find them today on Facebook. Remember, you've always had the key. Virginia this fall to experience the creepiest place around. Take part in the Ghost of Staunton Tours, produced by Marty Siebel and the residents of Staunton. Ticket prices range from $8 to $13. Private group rates are available. Learn more and investigate the tales of Mary Baldwin from the Mary Baldwin College, the Old Western State Mental Asylum, and much more. For tour times, ticket prices, and dates, visit their website at www.ghostofstaunton.com or call 540-448-2743. Available tour dates are limited and filling up fast. Make sure to secure your reservations for this fall season. Get out of the house and become a part of history. The Ghost of Staunton Tours, only in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. CDC guidelines are followed, and for questions, please visit www.ghostofstaunton.com or call 540-448-2743.
Welcome to the Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. And now, your host, Christina Spencer.
Welcome. 'Cause I know that it's real. And you 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 know that it's real. And
Hello there. Come on in and get cozy by the fireplace. Let me get settled into my old rocking chair and I'll tell you a couple stories. Haunting stories. Stories that are not for the faint of heart. Some of these stories may not be about hauntings per se, but nonetheless will haunt you. Because after all, some of the most scary things in life are not ghosts and demons, but the people we cross on the street. If you're brave enough, keep listening. If not, get up and leave now, because you'll never be the same. Don't say I didn't warn you. Welcome to the haunting stories from the old rocking chair. Everyone acted like she never existed, and then the police came. Written by It's Aaron. This takes place in the late 70s. My sister and I had just moved to Danville, Illinois. We were just 10 or so. My mom was a single mother and had never worked a job until after my dad passed. With no experience, no one would pay her good money. We loved him more than anyone. My mom was an alcoholic, abusive, and a bad parent. My dad felt like the only caring person in my life at the time. Me and my sister became best friends after his passing. Supporting each other and never leaving each other, we never wanted to leave each other's side. My mom had gone to jail for abuse just a month after moving, because she just couldn't afford food or showers every day. She sent us to a Catholic school to live on campus because no one would take us. The building had recently been rebuilt because of lead poisoning being a problem in older paint. When they built the building, every room had a small cellar under it. The entrances to the cellars were through the floor door, but when they rebuilt the building, they covered these doors with wood floor and carpet. One day during sleep time, my sister woke up to screams coming from inside the floor. The father had written it off as a mice problem, but she swore they sounded human. It sounded like words. Either way, the school didn't have mice. It had been a couple months since this incident. My birthday had passed and I turned 12. Normally at this age during school we moved to the other side of the school, but I had to leave my sister. I didn't have a choice to move. We still got to see each other during study time and meal times, but that was for only an hour a day and it wasn't enough. One time I tried to sneak out and sleep in my sister's dorm. I got there, but she wasn't there. The next day she wasn't there during study time. I thought maybe she had detention, but even during detention you get to sleep at your dorm. When my sister was not at her room again, the next day I knew something was up. I asked the principal if she had been transported to the other side of the school. He acted like he never ever had met her, and that I was going crazy. Everyone acted like this. It made no sense. It's as if she never existed. I felt so out of place. Everyone that cared about me was leaving. The next day I started hearing a muffled scream come from my floor. At this point I had forgotten about what my sister heard about a half a year earlier. I was scared for my life. When I tried to fall asleep, the principal barged in and tells me I can go back to my old dorm. I obviously agreed. I missed my old friends, and also I didn't want to hear the screams again. I didn't even think about my sister. Next day, the dorm on the other side of my dorm had police inside and outside it. The floor was entirely broken. There was a door in the floor. I asked the men what was in it, and they said I needed to leave. The morning after that, there was a rumor that someone was in the old cellar there. Everyone was still not knowing about my sister or her disappearance. The principal was arrested the next day for many rape charges and child abuse, and on the list of the victims was my sister. She had been taken to a Catholic orphanage. I hadn't been able to see her or spoken to her until we were both 18. She never spoke about the cellar or what happened, and still doesn't want to this day. I wish I knew exactly what happened, or at least why it happened. I've been a truck driver for a few months. I've seen some weird things. Part 3. Written by Blondie Trucker 97. Evening everyone, I'm back again with another story for my trucking adventures. I'll try to share as much information as I can about the places I go, but I really don't want anyone to cross paths with the things I've seen, so I'm also trying to keep very vague. For anyone who is out of the loop, I suggest listening to my first 2 accounts, otherwise this may not make as much sense. I really don't experience these things often, but when I do it can get pretty weird. Why does everything insist on coming out at night anyways? Whatever happened to daytime monsters? It's everything paranormal, nocturnal? Doesn't make a lot of sense if you ask me. I never thought I would have developed an aversion to beef, but my experience at this warehouse in Omaha has unfortunately left me with a rather bad experience with fresh meat. I'm not a vegetarian by any means, but after this, I need to have my steak a little bit more well done than I liked before. Let me back up. This was a few weeks after my terrifying experience in the Rocky Mountains of Montana. Life was going as normal as it can be as a trucker, and I just got a new load delivering from a beef distribution warehouse in Omaha going to eastern Tennessee. I normally don't deliver a lot of fresh food, but it's not really that unusual. They usually save trips like that for TCU drivers, temperature-controlled units, and I just haul dry van, which means the normal 53-foot trailer you probably always see. TCUs are normally responsible for hauling things like milk and other foods that need to be kept cold. Anyway, I'm on my way to this warehouse for a live load, to be loaded on site instead of picking up an already loaded trailer, which is normal for fresh foods. It's a routine pickup. I get there, sign in, back into the dock, and wait to be loaded. Once they're finished, which takes about an hour, they knock on my door and hand me the paperwork. I should mention it's also pretty late at this point, maybe 7 p.m. Not quite dark, but the sun is setting. I pull out from the dock and hop out to close my trailer doors and place the seal on it. As I walk to the back, I give the cargo a quick once-over to make sure it's loaded properly and isn't going to come crashing down when I take off. There's several pallets stacked high with plain white boxes labeled with whatever was inside them, which I assumed is beef or steaks. As I go to shut the door, a box must have came loose. It's not my job to stack the cargo properly, but this seems far too simple to trouble the employees. So I climb into the trailer to see if I can put it in a more secure spot. I picked up the box and looked at it, and I freeze. One end of the box came partially open when it fell, and I saw the contents of the box. It was not beef. Inside the box, frozen, vacuum sealed, and neatly severed, was a human hand. Several human hands, all stuffed into the box and was clearly packaged for sale. I had no idea what to think. This couldn't possibly be an accident. It's obviously packaged up. I looked at the label on the box and it read, Left Extremities Caucasian, and the date it was packaged, which was today. Yeah, no way this was an accident. I checked all the other boxes. They were all full of human body parts. All the labels said things like cranium and kidney. I was too scared to confront the employees about this. What if they were in on it? Maybe they had no idea what was in the boxes. But come on, I told myself, they transport these crates all day. They'd have to know exactly what they said. I decided to close the box and shove it back into the space where it fell from. Once I was miles away from this place, I'd call in an anonymous tip to the police about suspicious activity at the warehouse and never come back here. I jumped down from the trailer and slammed the door shut, placing the seal on the handles. Everything okay? The voice behind me startled me so much I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around to see the same guy who handed me the paper standing there with a grimace on his face. He knew I knew, and I knew he knew I knew. I tried to play it cool. Oh yeah, no, I'm good. A box just fell and I secured it, so we're all good to go, I said a little too cheerfully. The man kept intense eye contact with me the whole time. Well, he continued, have a safe trip. He tipped his hat to me, then walked away. That was weird, I thought to myself. I'm not sure what the guy's deal was, but he definitely knew something was up. I am so calling the cops on this place. It must have been some sort of black market operation. After I got the hell out of Dodge, I sent in an anonymous tip to the police, giving them the exact name and address of the place I went to, and telling them I was certain I saw human body parts being sold there. They thanked me, told me they would check it out, and then hung up. When I delivered the load, it was to a small, very dodgy-looking mom-and-pop operation. I dropped the trailer and hightailed it out of there. As for the police, I wasn't sure if I was going to hear back from them about it. But about a week later, I decided to call and ask them. I've never forgot what they told me. They told me they searched the premises and found nothing. Absolutely nothing. The place was abandoned. There was no one there, No evidence that any sort of business had ever been operating there. Not a single piece of identifiable evidence could be found. No security tapes, no leftover packaging or paperwork, just an empty warehouse. I was completely speechless. I thanked the officer I spoke to and hung up. I thought about telling them that I had paperwork for my delivery with their information on it, but since I called it in anonymously, I didn't want to be connected to any police files. I looked at the paperwork from the trip. I'm required to keep all my bills in order to be paid, and the address for the billing was some location in North Dakota. They were smart enough to use a different billing address. Well, that was a dead end, but I also reported the place I delivered to. No way those people didn't know what they were buying. I called back several times over the next few weeks, and the officer always told me he couldn't discuss an open case. At least that one was being investigated. I didn't think there was anything else I could do about this. As long as I never had to go back there, I really didn't care. It seemed to be mostly taken care of. That one really messed me up for a while. I'd seen some weird crap, but this was such a different kind of scary. I think people, myself included, tend to forget how real and deadly the black market and human trafficking can be. I don't pretend to know everything about it. Quite the opposite. This experience just made me realize you never know how close you are to this type of thing. Be vigilant, guys. You never know what could happen. Don't go alone, especially at night. Trust your instincts. If a situation feels off, get the hell out of there. Don't be afraid to kick and scream and raise hell. Do anything you have to save your life. Try to always carry protection. A pocket knife will do in a pinch. Just be safe, everyone. I hate for anyone else to end up as just a box of frozen hands in a trailer. Next time, this is Brittany, signing off. True Night Watchman Experience. Written by Dark Raven. I'll admit first off that I've heard of a lot of these deep web, dark web stories, and I've always called bullshit. However, a close friend of mine swore that she had been to these places and that she'd seen some really messed up things. Some she would talk about, others she refused. She said some of these things she had seen would haunt her for the rest of her life. I should have just let it go at that, but I wanted to believe that she was making it all up, and that there was no such place. But I was the one that was wrong. You know the drill by now. I downloaded Tor, Onion, and found the hidden wiki. I had been warned about some of the links and how they can trick you into some really crazy and horrible things. I clicked a few. They were mostly sex meetups, escort requests, and drug deals. Needless to say, I was really starting to think I was right and that the deep web was just an easy way to make shady deals that couldn't be traced. It was lame, tame, and a little boring. I looked around for something remotely interesting until I found the link, The Night Watchman. Okay, this could be interesting. I was thinking it might be some guy telling creepy stories or walking around a sleepy town at night or something. What greeted me was a flat, black page with 3 videos blown up to cover the space, sitting side by side in a line. They were paused. On each one of them was a picture of different people. The first one had a family of 4, a mom, a dad, and 2 little girls. The second was a couple, with the female being very obviously pregnant. The third was just one woman and her dog, a cute black lab with a white streak over its left eye. Before I could study them for too long, a voice came through. It was a male, but slightly distorted, so I couldn't really hear what he actually sounded like. Here's what he said. Good evening. Tonight, the Night Watchmen have brought you 3 unique households. Each of them lives different lives, believes different things, and has different future plans. He stopped here and cleared his throat. For this next part, it sounded like he was smiling. Watch each video and then choose one. I really didn't understand the point of the task, but honestly, my interest was piqued. I was curious about where this was going. I clicked the first video. There wasn't much to it. It just showed a family in their home, skipping through moments of them watching TV, playing in the backyard, having supper, the parents putting the kids to bed, starting to make love. It cut off there. Thank God. I was starting to feel like a weird creep. I was seeing part of people's lives that were meant only for them. I reluctantly clicked the next video. I was transported into a home of the young couples getting ready to start a family. It skipped through to them in the baby's room, hugging and generally looking excited. They ate salads at the kitchen table, went through the mail, looked through the baby books and magazines, watched a show on TV, and then went to bed, snuggling up together. This was so sweet, I couldn't help but smile at what I'd seen. However, I was still a voyeur in their personal moments. I had gone through the others. I just figured it was only right to watch the last one. This one was of a single woman living with just her dog. She was a bit of a slob. She had dishes piled up, laundry on the love seat in the living room, and trash that was overflowing. The other two had been pretty tidy, the family having some toys and laundry lying around. I wondered if there was a point to that, since it did show these aspects in the videos. Anyway, the woman seemed lonely. She watched a lot of TV, ate a half-gallon of ice cream, checked her cell phone every few minutes, obviously hoping for a call or a text, played fetch with her dog, fed him, then went to bed, taking her phone with her. She began to masturbate, and I began to feel incredibly awkward. Thankfully, this one ended there as well. I waited to see what was next. The video resets and went back to the stills of each one again. The voice came back over and said, "Now that you've seen, which one will you choose?" I sat there and watched, praying that someone else was there watching too and would choose, but nothing happened for a few minutes. The videos disappeared and another 3 videos began to play simultaneously. These turned my stomach. There were 3 tall men. I assumed they were all men by what character I could catch. They each wore the same clothing: black shirt, pants, boots, and a long black trench coat that dangled around their ankles. To top it all off, they each wore a large, wide-brimmed black hat. "Have you decided? Which one will you choose?" The voice chimed in over the obvious live feed. "Death comes on swift wings for our ill-fated friends. You must choose one. That is how the game goes." He thought this was a game. I was horrified. Was I really supposed to choose who died here and who survived? It was ridiculous, and I went to close the page down. Calmly, the voice began again. "Before you close this down, you should know that if you do not choose one of the 3 shown here, your family will be next." I was startled by his declaration, but figured that he was just trying to scare me. He was doing a really good job, truthfully. "Anna," he said. My heart skipped a beat. He said my name. Now I was officially terrified. I just wanted all this to stop. "Anna, dear sweet Anna, I know it's a difficult choice, but it must be made. Please, if you will, direct the night watchman to their door." The original video came back up, and I knew that meant it was time for me to pick someone to die. Maybe it's just a horrible joke that some hacker and his friends like to play on unsuspecting deep web servers, I stated out loud. It was more to make me feel better than anything, even though my heart was still pounding. I looked at the people again. There was a family there, children. I couldn't choose them. Then there was the expecting couple. I couldn't do this. It was too much. "Choose." The normally calm voice barked at me. "Choose now." I jumped and looked at the last one. It was of the lonely woman with the dog for a companion. She had the least to lose. She was alone without kids or a husband. It wasn't okay, but I quickly clicked her video. "Very well, so shall it be." The voice was calm and smooth once again. The videos of the night watchman came back up. "Night watchman, a choice has been made. You may attend to your work." I watched in horror as 2 of the watchmen began walking towards the houses in front of them. The 3rd one walked away from the house. I was so confused. I chose the lonely woman, but her watchman was walking away. He disappeared into the night, and the feed was cut off. The other 2 videos grew bigger and took up the screen. "What's going on? What's going on?" was all I could say. The 2 watchmen that it showed, each effortlessly broke into the houses. I was biting my bottom lip so hard it bled. The feeds walked along with them as they each silently roamed through the houses. One watchman walked into the set-up baby room and looked around gingerly. Then he made his way across the hall to the other bedroom. The other watchman walked slowly down the hall, seemingly trying to decide which room to enter. He chose the children's room. I looked over to the first one. He stood at the foot of the sleeping couple's bed, holding a huge machete. He walked to one side and began swinging it wildly. There were screams so loud and frightening that I felt like I might pass out and throw up. I looked over to the other video reluctantly. The watchman stood in the children's room, right in the center of the pink bunk bed. He also brandished a machete. I screamed as he raised it up and reached over and pulled the computer plug out of the wall. I was terrified, traumatized. What had I just witnessed? What had I just do? My mouth felt dry, my head was spinning out of control, and my heart felt like it might burst from my chest. After several hours, I decided to check my computer and hope that the nightmare I'd witnessed was gone. There was nothing. Days later, I was checking my email when I stopped and recoiled in horror. There was an email from the night watchman. I finally opened it. I really don't know why. Maybe I was hoping they would tell me I had been punked or something. Instead, it was just a few large words on an otherwise white background. Jenna thanks you for excluding her from a night watchman fate. We thank you for your choices too. We truly enjoyed our encounter with you. Come play again anytime. Attached was a photo of the lonely woman walking her dog in the park, still looking down at her phone. I will never ever access the deep web again. My grandpa's parrot keeps shouting weird stuff at me. Written by Help Creepy Landlady. I guess I should give you all some context on this before I get started. My grandpa loves animals, and he's had some pretty strange ones in his time. He had dogs and cats, but he prefers exotic animals like snakes and birds of paradise. Apparently, he once had a pet spider monkey, but that was before I was born. He lives on a farm now, and as a kid, I used to love going to visit him. I'd get to feed the chickens, play with his two dogs, and ride on the little russet-colored pony he had called Sir Jimmy. It was a pretty idyllic upbringing. I remember loathing the sound of my parents' car coming up the driveway because I knew it was time to go home, and I'd have to wait another month or so before I'd be able to come back. I never asked too much about what happened to my grandmother, but from what I've gathered over the years, she left not long after my mother was born, and they haven't heard from her since. My mom once hinted that there was a history of mental illness on that side of the family, and that it was possible that her mom's postnatal depression drove her to abandon them or worse. My grandpa never remarried, and I don't think he dated another woman after my grandmother left him. I never bring it up with him because I don't want to open any old wounds. Since I went to college, I've not been able to visit him as often as I used to, but I told him I'd stay with him for a whole summer once I graduated. The pandemic has made everything a lot more complicated, and I nearly decided to abandon the idea because I didn't want to put my grandpa at risk. In the end, my parents convinced me to go, because I could drive and it meant that I could safely get groceries for him. They worry about him living on his own since he's over an hour's drive away from my parents' house, and he's fiercely independent. He doesn't ask for help even when he needs it. The pandemic did mean I had to delay my trip, however, so I didn't arrive here until the start of September. When I first walked through the door, it felt like nothing much had changed, although the house was in a bit of a state. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, and there were dishes piled up in the sink, and still with molded food clinging to them. The smell in the kitchen was pretty unbearable, if I'm honest. My grandpa seemed well enough, though, and he was wearing clean clothes, so I tried not to worry myself too much. He had dropped a bit of weight, but he was in good spirits and totally cognizant. I told myself that I had plenty of time to get the house in order anyway. For the first week or so, I got stuck in with cleaning around the house and stocking up the kitchen. I was so engrossed in getting everything up to scratch that I didn't really pay too much attention to my grandpa's parrot, which is the only pet he has left now that he's too old to tend to the farm animals anymore. My parents were the ones who brought him the parrot, since he'd always talked about getting one, and he thought being able to talk with it might help him keep mentally stimulated. He had his heart set on a scarlet macaw because of their plumage, but in the end, my parents bought him an African gray parrot, since they're the most competent talkers. Staying true to his sense of humor, my grandpa named the parrot Bob, because of his habit of bobbing his head up and down when he got excited. It was about a week into my trip that Bob spoke up. I was in the kitchen sorting out some of the canned foods when I called out to my grandpa in the living room and asked what he wanted for dinner. "Shut up! Just shut up!" I heard him call from the other room, his voice hoarse as though he had been shouting for some time. I was in shock, so I asked him again in a softer tone, only to be told to shut my damn mouth. I decided to go check on him, and as I was walking through the hallway, I noticed Bob fidgeting in his cage. "Shut up," he snapped at me, in my grandpa's voice. It was a really surreal moment, and out of sheer nervousness, I started laughing. This apparently set the parrot off, because it embarked on a barrage of insults that I won't repeat here. All the while, I couldn't stop laughing, and by the time my grandpa found me, I was practically crying with laughter. "Oh, Bob," my grandpa said, wiggling his finger at the cage to try and calm the bird down. "That's no way to speak to our guest." My grandpa flashed me an apologetic smile and followed me into the kitchen to help sort out dinner. The whole incident seemed harmless enough until about a week ago. I don't know whether you've ever stayed in the countryside, but the nights out there are about as dark as they come. Sometimes when I'd sleep over at my grandpa's farm, I felt like the sheer weight of that darkness was physically pressing down on me. It wasn't necessarily an unpleasant feeling, but there was something unnerving about the almost impenetrable type of blackness. It was into the blackness that I awoke to the sound of a woman screaming. "No!" I heard from downstairs. "Please stop!" It sounded as though her cries for help were mingled with weeping. I was paralyzed with fear, but summed up my courage to grab my dressing gown, turned my phone's flashlight on, and rushed downstairs. I had no idea what I encountered on my way down. When I got to the base of the stairs, I could still hear the sound of a woman whimpering, and I followed the sound down the hallway. It was the damn parrot. I put my hand on my hip and wagged my finger. "Bob," I said, "you scared the shit out of me. Please don't do that again." He only responded by bouncing up and down, so feeling relieved yet exhausted, I turned around to go back to bed. As I was about to start up the stairs, however, something stopped me dead in my tracks. "He's going to kill me," the parrot screamed, with such visceral fear that the hairs on my arms prickled up. I swiveled around to check that it was still the parrot, since the sound felt so human. The light from my phone glanced off of the parrot's glassy eyes as he turned his head left and then right. I wondered if there might be something wrong with him, so I decided I'd wake up my grandpa and see what we should do. As I climbed the staircase, every creak sent a shock wave up my spine. I haven't felt this shook up since I was a kid, and I caught a glimpse of Grandpa putting down one of the sick pigs. When I reached his bedroom, I turned the doorknob as quietly as possible, as not to give him a fright. I crept into the room and started walking towards the bed. When it struck me, I couldn't hear him breathing. My grandpa is a heavy sleeper, and he snores almost constantly throughout the night, so this put me on edge. I rushed to the side of the bed, thinking the worst, only to find that he wasn't there. I shone my flashlight around the room, but there was no sign of him. In a panic, I went on a tear through the top floor of the house, turning on all the lights and checking all the rooms. He wasn't nowhere to be found. I went down the stairs again and caught sight of the parrot, who kept taking me in with sideway glances from those reptilian eyes. I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I felt compelled to approach his cage and take a closer look at him. To my surprise, the parrot seemed receptive and almost calmed by my presence. I reached through the cage, and he let me stroke his head, which was downy and soft. I don't know how long I stood there petting him, but I remember feeling at ease. By the time I felt the sharp corner of his beak sinking into my fleshy tip of my finger, I was already in a trance. In a split second, I was reeling backwards and lurching away from his cage as he fluffed out his feathers and raised his wings in an unmistakable display of aggression. "He's coming," the parrot screamed, bobbing up and down with increasing fervor. "He's coming!" I heard something wooden slam in the living room, and out of instinct, I trained my flashlight on the source of the sound. All I could see was my grandpa standing upright in the corner of the living room and staring right at me. He was so silent and still that at first I thought he might be sleepwalking. "Grandpa?" I called out, my voice trembling. Without a sound, he started walking towards me with his eyes trained on me and his head turned slightly downwards, so the rings under his eyes seemed like two dark pools that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. It wasn't until he was about 2 feet away from me that he smiled, and his expression softened. "Oh," he said, "it's you," as though he had just seen someone in the street that he recognized. "Come on, my dear," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "You should be getting to bed. You've been working so hard for your old grandpa." With that, he ushered me upstairs and back into my bedroom, even going as far to stand in the doorway and shut the door. I wanted desperately to chalk his actions up to the onset of senility, but there was something so menacing and deliberate in the way that he approached me that night, as if he thought I might be someone else. What would he have done if he hadn't recognized me? I don't want to really think about that too much. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night, and I swear I could still hear him shuffling around downstairs long after he'd gone to bed. I couldn't get the image of him standing in the corner of that room out of my mind. The next day I didn't broach the subject, and neither did he. We barely spoke the whole day, and the parrot spent most of the day sleeping. An endless series of questions seared themselves into my brain and tormented me for the next few days. I wasn't sure whether to get in touch with my parents, forget about the incident altogether, or handle it myself. In the end, I came to a conclusion that the answers I sought could be found in the corner of that room. The only issue is that my grandpa is almost always in the living room or somewhere nearby, so it was difficult to find a window of opportunity when he wouldn't be able to see me. Luckily today, I convinced him to take a short walk outside to get some fresh air, and I seized the opportunity to finally check what was in the corner of the room. I spent ages agonizing over the wallpaper, seeing if there were holes or any indications of anything unusual, knowing in the back of my mind that I had only a precious few moments. I could feel the blood pounding in my head as I searched, but I couldn't find anything. It was then that I looked down and saw the corner of the carpet, which looked as though it had been shifted ever so slightly. When I pulled up the corner, I discovered a hatch in the wooden floor. I don't remember my grandpa ever mentioning that this house had a cellar, but the hatch had no dust on it and must have been used relatively recently. It took all of my self-control not to bend down or wrench open the door. I'm thankful that I didn't give in to the temptation, because not long after I made the discovery, I heard the back door slam and my grandpa's shuffling gait as he walked through the kitchen. He thanked me for the suggestion, since the walk had done him some good, and then settled into his leather armchair. I didn't think he suspected me just yet. What should I do? I'm going to be here at least until Thanksgiving, and I don't want my imagination to get the better of me. But I have an uneasy feeling about everything that's been going on. Should I call my parents? Or just forget all this ever happened? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. I've been a trucker for a few months. I've seen some weird things. Written by Blonde Trucker 97. When I first took this job to be an over-the-road trucker, I thought it would be really exciting. I thought I'd get to travel the country and see the sights and come home with stories to tell my friends and family. I was right. This job is exciting. But I soon found that I'm better off not sharing those stories with anyone close to me. Not because I don't trust them, but because I'm worried they wouldn't believe me. Let me back up. My name is Brittany. I'm 22 years old. I've been driving with a rather large company for a few months now, that I won't name due to obvious reasons. Ever since my training ended and I got my own truck to start solo, I've seen some pretty weird shit. When you're driving the loneliest road in America, yeah, that's its real name, in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, things start to get to you. I suppose it was only a matter of time before I saw something out there in the desert at nearly midnight. I still had another hour to the nearest truck stop, and blasting the freezing cold air against my face was all I could do to keep myself from dozing off the wheel. Irresponsible, I know, but until you work the job, you don't understand how much lax comes with it. I was driving this highway, in the desert, in the pitch blackness of a cold summer night, when suddenly something runs out in the road in front of me. Before I can even react, it's gone across the other side into the bushes. I barely got a good look at it, but I could have sworn it looked like a large, white dog, faster than any dog I've ever seen. I tried to just ignore it and keep driving. I see animals crossing the road at night all the time. It didn't seem like anything to get too worked up about. Not even a minute later, I feel my truck lurch to the left and into the other lane. I quickly try to swerve and correct it, and easily step on the brake so I don't wreck. It can be easy to jackknife an 80,000-pound metal death machine. I slow it down and regain control. I look for the nearest pullover spot so I can see what the hell just hit my rig and see if there's any damage. Once I find a spot and turn off, hit my brakes, and hop out. I walk around to the other side and see a large dent in the side of my trailer. What the frick? I say to myself as I walk over to inspect the side of the trailer. It's a huge dent, at least 5 feet wide and tall. No real shape to it, just a general dent. I can't imagine what could have hit me. My first thought was maybe a boulder rolled down from the side of a hill and smashed into me, but I don't think I was driving next to any hills or mountains. As far as I knew, it was just flat desert. I hear the sound of dirt crunching underfoot behind me and I turn around. My breath catches in my throat and my stomach drops. I see something standing not 50 feet away from me. It's large, menacing, and white. I can't even find the words to describe what this thing looked like. It looked like a very large dog, and that's a stretch. It stood on 2 short, stout legs, with long forearms reaching down past its knees. Its shoulders were broad and heaving, as if it just ran a marathon. Its head was mostly shaped like a wolf, with a large snout filled with razor-sharp teeth buried in a snarl. Saliva dripping from its maw. Its jet-black eyes bore right into me, filled with hatred and hunger. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. This creature stood between me and my only salvation, my truck. We stared at one another for a moment until I broke the silence. "You're one ugly MFer," I said. It snarled at me, then very unexpectedly it turned and walked away slowly, using all 4 of its limbs, receding into the bushes and into the night. I stood there for what felt like several minutes, wondering if it would jump out and feed on my flesh at any moment. It never came back. I ran around the front of my truck and jumped inside, locking the door quickly and flooring it, as fast as you can floor an 18-wheeler, which is not at all. Soon I was back on the highway and barreling down it as if my life depended on it. For a while it felt like it did. Within a half hour I found myself at the truck stop and shut down for the night. Sleep was difficult that night. I was certain every noise I heard was that damn creature returning. Luckily, the night went on without another incident. I have more stories to tell, but this is getting long, so I think I'll stop here. Remember, guys, be careful out there on the road. You never know what else could be out there with you. I'm an EMT and I just had the most terrifying call ever. Written by TYX31. Hi everyone, my name is Ty and I am an EMT in Canada. I'm a long-time lurker to no sleep, but I had a call the other night that is making me submit for the first time ever. For a bit of a backstory, I work in a major metropolitan city running both emergency and facility transfer calls. Every so often, we will get a long-distance transfer, or an LDT, which is when someone is returning to their home community after being treated in the city. The LDT itself was uneventful, as they generally are, and my partner and I were excited for the road trip home, listening to music and having some road snacks, but it wasn't meant to be. About 30 minutes into the drive home, our data terminal toned, and our dispatch came across the radio. B9, you have been attached to a 31 card. Our partner and I looked at each other and shrugged. B9 copies. Now, a 31 card is for an unconscious person, which could be anything from someone sleeping in an alleyway to a cardiac arrest. It all depends on what information is relayed to our dispatcher, which in this case was next to nothing. We had about a 15-minute response time during which we mentally prepared for the call, deciding what equipment to bring into the scene, if we need any additional resources, etc. The biggest problem presenting us was that we were simply unfamiliar with the area, which meant we had no idea what extra resources we might be able to call in or what the capabilities of the nearest rural hospital were. We arrived on the scene to a typical rural farmhouse, and having no additional information in our dispatch notes, got out of the truck ready to head in. We decided to bring only our monitor and primary kit in order to do a quick assessment, and if we needed extra equipment, I would send my partner out to get it. One of the first things an experienced EMT or medic will do is take a look at their surroundings on scene. This will help identify hazards, things that seem out of place, or possible causes of what happened to the patient. You also gain a sixth sense for when things just seem to be off. As we walked up to the farmhouse, the hairs on my neck stood up and I got the feeling we were being watched. I shrugged it off, figuring that it was someone that called for the ambulance. They likely saw our lights and were watching us come up to the house. I knocked on the door and stood back to the side. The door was opened by a fairly large man. For reference, I'm 6 feet, 200 pounds. He was taller than me by about 4 inches and outweighed me by about 60 pounds. He greeted us in an eerily calm manner, considering there was an emergency happening. "She's in the back room," he said, as he jerked his thumb over his shoulder and stepped aside for us to go in. As I walked into the room, I froze. My patient was on the ground. Her throat was slit. It was no longer bleeding, which told me that we were too late, but that's besides the point. Someone having their throat slit doesn't just happen, and I turned around to tell my partner that we needed to get the hell out of there. We were blocked by the guy standing in the doorway. "You're not going anywhere," he said, as he pulled a large knife from behind his back. My partner and I split up to opposite sides of the room, which is likely the only reason I'm alive to tell you this today. As he walked towards me, my partner hit him in the shoulder with our monitor, then brought it down onto his head. We ran out of the house, updating dispatch to the situation and that police needed to be on the scene ASAP. We informed dispatch that we would give statements at a later date and the police could access our paperwork as needed, but there's no way in hell we're staying on scene longer than we had to. We made it back to the city in record time, and we were never so happy to see the city lights. I'm not sure I like LDTs anymore. The Walk, written by Aspiring Waffle. Preface. I am a 23-year-old woman and I'm half Cherokee from Georgia, USA. At the time the story took place, my fiancé and I were living on a large farm in Maryland. We didn't use the farm, but we were renting a small house on the property and we were free to come and go around the grounds. I was only 19 at the time that this took place, and the only residents in our home were myself, my fiancé, our cat, and dog. Our cat was a lunatic barn cat that I had rescued because I can't say no to animals that need our help, and our dog was my little pit bull, who is a sweet, cuddly, scaredy cat. She weighed about 75 pounds and is afraid of her own shadow. Our farm was situated on about 20 acres of land, and our driveway was about a half a mile long. So usually when I would get home from work, my loyal dog and I would go for a walk, and usually I brought my fiancé with me. Not that I was afraid to go out alone, just that he spends too much time playing games and walking uses his legs. After our driveway was a 12-mile-long road through the woods and farms until it finally reconnected with civilization, so it was safe to say that we were far, far from other people, except for our landlord, of course. The first mile was through open farmland, followed by a brief patch of forest, and then about a half a mile of wheat fields, and then a solid forest for another 2 miles. Now that you have a bit of a layout, on to the really creepy bit. So it started off like any other weekday evening. My fiancé and I returned home from work to our happy little cottage and happy little pets. Harley, our dog, was frantic to go for a walk, so I quieted her and changed into walking clothes and asked my fiancé if he would like to join me. He had gotten home shortly after me and said that he'd seen one of the coyotes that we have around close in the field by our house. But as you may know, coyotes are mostly scavengers, especially out here on the East Coast, so I wasn't too worried, and I'm very capable of defending myself. I called him a puss and then told Harley that we could go and then we'd be fine without him. Laughing to myself, we left the cottage and started walking towards the driveway. The sun was going down and the October air had started to get a chill to it, and it rustled through the cornfields next to our long driveway. The corn was about 6 feet tall at this point in the year and impossible to see through, so I'm assuming that my fiancé was trying to scare me because there was no way he could have seen a coyote in the field. Harley was enjoying her time in the field, tearing in and out of the corn stalks on our walk up the driveway, and I knew that with as big of a coward as she was, that she would alert me to any danger very quickly by running away from it. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the sun had set, and the moon, which had already come out, was shining high above the fields. It wasn't quite full, but it provided enough light that I didn't need to use my flashlight or Harley's collar light. We turned left down the road and proceeded across the first section of fields. The first field was soybeans, and if you don't know, they are relatively short plants. Nothing but a rabbit could hide in them. And off in the distance, I spotted a few deer, but nothing alarming, so we relaxed and enjoyed our walk through the night air. I threw a stick and Harley brought it back over and over again. Typical dog and owner stuff. We reached the first small section of trees, and Harley stopped and bumped into my leg, letting me know there was something ahead. It wasn't a coyote or a deer, but there was a rabbit, and it had been hit by a passing car and was still struggling. There was no way it was going to live, and honestly, it probably is what drew the coyote pack in. I knelt down by it and used my knife quickly to put it out of its misery, as my family had taught me, and let it pass into the next life. Feeling sad but somewhat relieved that all we had encountered was a handful of deer and that poor rabbit, we continued our walk and passed into the next field. This was a wheat field, and the wheat was about ready for harvest, so it was quite tall and hard to see through. The field was quiet, though, and Harley didn't do anything, so I figured that the coyotes had passed on if there had been any at all. Now this is the part you have been waiting for, and I don't know what it was, but here it is. We rounded the corner of the field and into an area with wheat on our left and forest on our right, and the air seemed to go still. Harley got closer to me, and I heard rustling in the wheat field. I saw 3 tails circling back towards the forest. Coyotes. The eastern coyotes are small, but in a pack they can get pretty ballsy. Harley raised her heckles and I yelled, "Get out of here! Go on! F off!" as loud as I could, and the coyotes startled and scattered off into the trees. I decided to turn around and get out of there before they decided to regroup, because I'm brave, but I'm not going to walk into a darkened forest with a coyote pack and a cowardly pit bull. We turned to head back, and again I heard rustling in the wheat. A confused coyote? I thought it must be, but no. Harley was standing stock still, staring at the wheat, and I whistled for her to come to me. That high-pitched, ear-piercing, 2-fingered whistle? That snapped her out of it for a second when my whistle was returned from inside the wheat. All of a sudden, all of my family legends I'd heard come flooding back to me, and I expected to see a tall, thin creature emerging, but nothing did. I didn't smell rotting meat or feel a sense of dread. Instead, I was transfixed for fear and curiosity. I whistled again. The whistle was returned yet again. Very human sounding, but at the same time not. Against my better judgment, I said, "Hello?" My own voice replied, "Hello?" My hand was on my knife, and I said, "Show yourself." Silence. No bugs, no coyotes, no Harley noises, just my own breath. Slowly, the rustling started again, and I turned on my flashlight. I shined it on the wheat field, and what I saw confused me to this day. Animal eyes, that green and yellow reflection of light that was cast back to me, but what it was connected to didn't make sense to me. There was a girl, no more than 14 or 16, crouched in the wheat. She wore what I think must have been some kind of deer skin or fur skin, and she was naked otherwise. She was very thin and looked as though her skin had never seen sunlight. Her hair was long and tangled with wheat and leaves. Under any other circumstances, I would have said she was beautiful, but at that moment she was terrifying. We stared at each other for what must have been for a solid minute or so, but felt like much longer, until I heard unmistakably a coyote howl from the forest. Both of her heads snapped towards the noise, and immediately I heard her take off through the wheat towards the sound. At the same moment, Harley took off towards our house, and I went after her. We didn't stop running until we got to the driveway, and I stopped, not wanting my fiancé to know I was running away from something. I could still hear the howling in the distance, and we started walking at a brisk pace. We made it back to the cottage with no further problems, and I didn't tell my fiancé about it, not wanting him to go out with a gun. She hadn't hurt me, so I didn't think it was right to hunt her. I was awoken in the middle of the night that night by the sound of coyotes outside our cottage. This wasn't unusual, but now I wondered if she was with them. When I was coming home from work about a month later, I had stopped obsessing about that night, and I almost thought I had imagined it when I had to slam on my brakes for something in the road. It was dark, and when my headlights hit its eyes, it reflected green and yellow. It was a large coyote. It just stared at my car for a moment and ran off into the woods. I know this sounds crazy, but I still wonder if that was her. Experienced a car crash yesterday morning that didn't actually happen. Written by Alex saying that. So I don't really know how to explain this, or if it even fits into the sub, or even what actually happened if I'm being honest, but regardless, I will try to relay the story. I was driving to work yesterday morning, and I'm coming up a side street that connects to a very busy road in my area. It's the main road that stretches through like 20 towns. I get to the red light at the main road and sit there for about 15 seconds before seeing a car pull up behind me. As the car comes to a complete stop behind me, my eyes drift from the rear view mirror to the stoplight in front of me. It was still red. I then looked down to my radio clock and it said 7:36. And this is going to sound strange, but for a period of time that seemed to stretch until infinity. I kind of felt like this intense pressure all around me. Like I was zoned out and couldn't clear my head or move my body because I was obsessed with the numbers I was seeing. Like I was in a trance or something, and it was silent around me, but it was at the same time like very, very loud pressing silence. I couldn't move, but I also wasn't trying to move, almost like I was paralyzed with fear and knew I was frozen, but I couldn't really process it or try to move. I don't know. I can't really explain it. Even now, it's so confusing to me. After who knows how long of being stuck in the trance, suddenly everything snaps back to normal, instantly. The very first thing I register is that the person behind me is laying on their horn. I look up and see the light is green. I begin to drive forward, feeling completely 100% normal again. And once I get into the middle of the intersection, I sense this large presence to the right, left of me. I turn my head to look out my driver's side window just in time to see a huge truck coming right at me. It hits me, and I could feel my body break. I felt and heard so many bones get absolutely crushed. Suddenly I'm upside down in my car, in so much pain I can hardly breathe, covered in glass, and I can hear someone screaming. The last thing I remember before passing out about 10 seconds later was seeing cop lights and distinctly thinking to myself, wow, how did he get here so fast? This is important later. The next thing I remember, I open my eyes and I'm sitting in my car at the red light. The intense pain I felt a moment ago is fading fast, but it's still there. Only almost like a ghost version of itself, if that makes sense. I'm intensely confused at this point, and I start looking around in a panicky way, and my eyes trail across the clock again. It says 7:36, and I'm beyond confused. I know it wasn't a daydream. It was so goddamn real. I'm frozen in place, staring at the clock, trying to figure out what the frick just happened. After about 5 or 10 seconds, I hear the person behind me start to beep at me, but I'm shaking and about to cry and so overwhelmed with leftover fear that I can't even react to it. They start to lay on their horn, and I still can't move because I'm just so confused and frightened. Now at this point, I was starting to calm myself down and trying to rationalize what happened. I was beginning to convince myself that it had been just a daydream. It was early enough and I was tired enough that I even started to think I just nodded off at the red light and dreamed the crash. What the hell else could it have been, right? If it weren't for what happened next, I probably would have been able to go the rest of my life believing I had fallen asleep and dreamed it. The moment the clock turned 7:37, like the very second the number changed, a huge truck come barreling through the light, definitely speeding. They ran the red light and crossed in front of my car. A few seconds later, a cop, who must have been just behind the truck in the first place, runs the red light as well, turning his lights on in the process and beginning to pursue the speeding truck. They both drove out of my view within a few seconds. I was so shaken, I just pulled my car to the side of the road, right where I was, and sat there in silence for I don't even know how long. Like, what normal explanation could I possibly come up for this? There isn't one. I hadn't seen the truck or the cop car before they ran the light in front of me, so how did I dream the crash? I had included these very specific and very real details. The entire area I live in is covered in trees, so it's not like I can see very far down the road in either direction. I know for a fact I did not see that truck or the cop car before I experienced the crash. I'm still so shaken. How do I rationalize this experience to myself? I felt disillusioned by something that I don't even know what. I feel like I'm going crazy. I needed to share this with people who won't automatically dismiss this as a hallucination or a dream. I hope you all enjoyed all of our haunted tales this evening. If you would like to discuss any of the stories on tonight's podcast, or just chat live with me, join our Discord server. I'm always live on there during and after the podcast every Sunday night starting at 7 p.m. Join our community on our Facebook group page and YouTube channel. If you have a haunting story of your own or artwork and you want to submit it for consideration for the future show, drop me a line on our Reddit page or email address. All our links are below in the description. Special thanks to Darken Mood, Darken_M00D, for all his wonderful art that you can check out on his Reddit page. I want to thank all our brave storytellers, for without them there would be no show. A detailed list of story credits are in the description. But most importantly, I want to thank you, the listener, for taking time out of your day to listen to Haunted Tales from the Old Rocking Chair. I hope you have a wonderful night, and as always, sweet dreams. Alright guys, that is the podcast for this evening. As always, this is a Riff Radio Network production. Next week we're going back into our regular programming. All original stories next week, so I'm looking forward to that. So tune in next week. Like I said, it's all going to be original stories, the same format. And I'm trying to think if I remembered everything I was going to say. I'll make sure that you check it out on YouTube. If you know somebody would be interested and they'd like to watch the podcast, afterwards I upload it to YouTube probably later tonight. So all the old podcasts are on there and the new ones, and there are some I guess you would call them video novellas based off some of the stories that my son did earlier this year. But I think that's everything. I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful night. And as always, sweet dreams.